Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this month's Family Protection Planning webinar series. We are joined tonight by Carla Torres. She is the owner of A Venerated Death that offers several different end-of-life care services to the community. She is passionate about normalizing the topic of death and dying in our everyday conversations and has sat at the bedside of many people in their final days. It is Carla's hope to bring death back to its sacred place through her end-of-life care services, where she can meet people at this part of life with a presence of non-judgment, support, and human vulnerability. I had the pleasure of meeting Carla about a month ago when I attended her in-person group offering called In My Advanced Directive Era. It was an afternoon dedicated to creating my death file by choosing my death care advocate and using a handy workbook that Carla created to record funeral selections and planning other various important healthcare decisions. I'm so inspired by the work that she does for her clients before, during, and after death. And I'm excited to have her share her story and offerings tonight. A couple of things that she'll be discussing, why it's important to keep the end in mind, how to begin this process, what is essential at end of life, and provide resources to get you started. So welcome, Carla. I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction and also for having me. And I'll share my screen as soon as it allows. Oh, there we go. Oh no, my tabs went away. Of course. Sorry about that. And of course, it's taking forever to load.
That's okay.
Alrighty.
There we go. That looks great.
Yay. Awesome. So again, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here in this community with you, Nicole, and you're also your community that partakes in this and talk about the topic that I am so passionate about and so interested in, which is the topic of end-of-life care in our community. So thanks again for having me. Again, one of my slogans or my taglines that you'll see here is helping you bring death back to its sacred place. So we're going to really get into what that means as far as our perspectives on that, and then also what we can do to start holding death in a little bit more of a sacred way or a sacred manner, and implement some tangible skill sets to plan for your end of life. So before we did that, I just want to do a little bit deeper of an introduction of myself. Again, my name is Carla, and I own a small business in the death care field called A Venerated Death, where I offer end-of-life care services that specialize in individualized support and care for the dying and their families. Within this work, I work as a death doula and a death midwife. And I'm able to support my community in navigating available options and choices for end of life through planning, implementing those plans, and also a lot of creating meaning through the dying process and after a death has occurred. That's a big part of my passion of that sacredness around holding that space. And I'm able to do that through those midwife and doula services. And also, I'm just really deeply connected to the education around end of life processes for individuals at any age or any circumstance of end of life or death. And my mission is to help individuals see death and dying in a normalized way and as a sacred act of life. And with all of that aside, also, I'm a human being who has gone through some losses of my own that have really led me to this work and motivated me to notice the lack of the processes that I'm talking about, in ways that I was trying to support loved ones that just wasn't there. And that was really what brought me here today. And I just want to share that as we are talking about a vulnerable and intense and sometimes really hard topic of death, um, and bringing that to the forefront of our minds. I just want to make it clear that I'm also human and have been through it, and it's tough and it's hard. But as my job and my services go, I try to make that a little bit more easy on people to have a streamlined skill set to be able to know what your options and your choices are, rather than feeling like you have to navigate end of life experiences in the dark, which I have, for one, been a byproduct of. So that goes without saying that the next thing is just an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. Nicole already mentioned it, but I'll just say it again. We're going to talk about the importance of end of life care and why it's important to keep the end in mind and how we do that. What does that mean, and how do we keep the end in mind? Some essentials of end of life, and then some really valuable resources that can help you get started, to help you on this road to keeping the end in mind for yourself. So we'll begin with just a little explanation about more of the sacredness and what an venerated death is. So the a venerated death is the sacred understanding that birth, life, and death are a part of the same thread in our human experience. Death is not opposite of life. Life includes death. And the fact that we die is actually very life affirming. The veneration of this understanding is taking time in your life to plan and to share your end of life wishes with your loved ones. So that's kind of this is actually on my website if you were to check it out, but it's really kind of my intention of what that means to help you bring death back to its sacred place, or to hold it in that way, is really just that understanding that death is a part of life. And actually, the fact that we die means that we've lived. And that's a beautiful thing. So, the sacredness is that honor and that respect that we do while we're living, in effort to honor our death like we lived. I find that to be really important. Here's a little bit about the importance of end of life care. So, just some of my thoughts just to share with all of you to kind of get this framework of why we would keep the end in mind, or the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later while we're in this discussion, is kind of just giving you the framework about just where my intentions are and what my beliefs are. And maybe that'll kind of help you frame, oh, okay, I understand, I get that, I resonate with that. And when I'm thinking of my end of life planning, maybe this gives you some tangible verbiage or perspectives to hold as to why you would want to do that for yourself or your loved ones. So, in regard to end of life care, I believe in the importance of end of life care because I understand the importance of being alive. I know that this will all one day end, unfortunately. And the one thing that I know that everyone that I come in contact with, that I have in common with, is the fact that we are all going to die eventually. Eventually, one day, this will all come to an end. So it's something that we can navigate as a community, that we can hold each other through it. And that's also why end of life care is really important, because we're all going to go through it in one way or another. Hopefully, that's in a far, far, far distance for all of us tonight. But eventually, it'll happen. And the need for end of life care in our community is to aid individuals dying with the same honor and respect as we lived, through intentional death care and planning. So you're probably going to hear me say that a lot this evening around honor and respect and sacredness, and also about planning, because a lot of the importance of end of life care and the forethought of what's essential at end of life is planning. So you're going to probably hear that word far too many times, but it'll be a good thing at the end. All right. So, why is it important to keep the end in mind? So, keeping the end in mind will actually help you live with more purpose and intention. And that is a surprising, kind of controversial way of thinking about death or the end of our lives. It's not the first thing that would come to our mind, is that, oh, wow, thinking about my end would bring me purpose or intention. But when we tend to talk about death, in the way of, or when we're well and we're thriving, usually that kind of that understanding and that acceptance that we gain throughout our lives when we're not in a situation of a terminal diagnosis, or maybe something sudden happening to a loved one, or we're not in that stress brain or that overwhelm sense of death really falling, or mortality really falling on our laps. We can really use death as a catalyst to really bring us back to the present moment, to um, see where we're living, where we're putting our energy into, what our priorities are, what are things that we can shift and change. And so, yeah, when we think about the end in the state that we are when we're alive and we're enjoying life, it brings purpose and intention to our lives, because there's this sweetness about the fact that we can understand that we are mortal beings and that one day we will die. It brings purpose to our moments, it brings intention to our everyday lives. Um, and when you face dying as one of the most human things that we can do in life, then you can feel empowered by the options and the choices that are available to you before, before and during your dying time and after death. So I really love this aspect, and this is really what I hope that you all get from this discussion this evening, is that when you think about death and you kind of say, hey, okay, I know that's something that's going to happen. Maybe you don't need to talk about it every day and within every conversation in your life, but maybe you just kind of create a little bit of a resource within your mind about the fact that that's going to happen at some point. Then you can feel really empowered by the options and the choices that you make for that experience. And obviously, also, we don't know how that's going to happen. Death is the most mysterious thing that we will probably go through, but we can make choices, and there are options and there are resources available to you even now, while you're well and you're thriving, that will help you should many different circumstances come to your end of life experience. But the only caveat there is that if we don't face it while we're well, while we're thriving, while we're alive, then we won't have that choice. Then we don't have choice, because then, like many people, and no judgment, it is just the way of our culture and just the way of our community. Then, when death approaches or death is near, we have we don't have time. We don't have time to really sit down with this end in mind and really explore our options or explore our choices, because we hadn't thought about it before and now we're dealing with it. So it's kind of whatever is at hand. And not to say that just because that's the scenario, it can't go well or you won't have choice, but I just really advocate for people having the end in mind as soon as possible, so that they're prepared and so that they know. And so we'll go on to a little bit more about the nitty gritty of, like, how do we keep the end in mind? So I have some things here just to get the ball rolling and kind of get a little creation in your mind of, okay, what does that look like fundamentally? So the first thing I put up there is create a death file with all of your important end of life documents. So a death file is maybe something that you've not heard about before, but it's literally a death file. It's a file with all of your end of life plans. So if you have a will, if you have financial stuff, you own property, all of your assets, all of the things that you've gained in life, you've invested in life, and also all of your wills and your wants for what's going to happen to your property, what's going to happen to your items, all of your things. If you can compact it into one place, which I'm calling a death file, and works really well for me, is putting it all in one place, somewhere safe in your home that you can build over time. Now that we're kind of already diving into how keeping the end in mind and the steps that you go, is that keeping the end in mind is meaning adding to your death file as you live. And some of the things that might go in your death file, one being is the next, which is your state's advanced directive, or directive. So most states have a legal advanced care directive. And if you're not familiar with what an advanced care directive is, it is your wants and your wishes, in a medical sense, if you were ever to become incapacitated. So if there was ever something by disease or illness or accident that should happen to you throughout your lifetime, and you are unable to speak your own wishes and wants during that time, advanced care directive has your back. So there's also an advanced death care directive. Those are not usually by legal states like an ordinance. Those are usually just somebody makes it. I have one. I think Nicole mentioned the one that she did with me, that I created, but it's also called an advanced directive because it's the forethought. So it's a directive should this ever happen to me. And then the next thing I have is to appoint a healthcare and death care advocate. So that's already something that you would do if you did fill out your advanced care directive. It's part of it. But even if you can, if say you haven't gone around to having an advanced care directive done, but you know, hey, I know that I need my husband to know, or my partner or my sister or my best friend or whoever that person is for you, that should something happen to me, I need them to know what I want. So that's what that person does. And then they have basically full will to abide by what is in your advanced care directive or your wishes, however that form takes place for you. Um, and also they have also the authority to make decisions outside of your advanced care directive, unless you had something in your advanced care directive that said you can only go by this. There's no edits or addendums outside of what I put in here and signed on this date and time. So very important to have a healthcare and death care agent, or advocate, on your side. And then the next thing about keeping the end in mind is research and educating yourself. So a lot of the things that I'm going to bring up here and even the resources at the end are kind of like handing that opportunity or that invitation to you to research what your end of life options are in your community and in your state. What educate yourself on what are the laws, what are the things I want, like what are the things I want at my end of life, and also what's available to me, what funeral homes do the type of body disposition that I want. Is working with a death doula part of your end of life plan? Okay, let's research and educate ourselves on who's available and why. Estate attorneys also really wonderful in this realm of keeping the end in mind, and also something to look into and research, how they can help you with your estate. After you would do that, you would put that in your death file as well. Yeah, so choosing your end of life care options, including body disposition and funeral plans. So researching and educating yourself on funeral homes in your area, meeting your funeral director, touring those funeral homes, asking really viable and upfront questions about how they care for their decedents and how they treat their families, and making sure that that's really in alignment with what you want based off of your needs and your wants at end of life. And then I just put some highlighted on the planning and sharing your wishes. So I would say that outside of there's so much more I could say about each one of these little dots on the left, but really it comes down to pre-planning. So having the forethought of an end in mind is the start to planning. And then writing those wishes down on paper and keeping them in a safe place for when the time comes. So I really just want to nail in the forethought. So it's really about that. Okay, I'm thinking about the end, and I don't know the what's and the who's and the hows, but I know one thing. And honestly, I say it all the time. One thing that you have written down for your end of life wishes will change the trajectory of your entire end of life experience, like tenfold. Even though there's mystery and there's a lot of things that we are unknown, the more no's that you have and the more wishes that you have down on paper, also with the second one of sharing those with your loved ones, is going to support you in changing that trajectory and having autonomy with what happens to you through your medical care, your comfort care, lack thereof, also what happens to your body after you died. So after you have a plan for your end of life, the most important thing you can do is then share those wishes with your loved ones and your medical team. So I would say, and if I could just make an entire slide just about sharing your wishes, I would say that that is the biggest part, of how we keep the end in mind. Is yes, of course, you have to come up with a plan. You have to know that. But if you don't share it with anyone, if you don't have these really deep and intimate conversations with the people who love you and vice versa, then they don't know how to uphold your wishes. So you could potentially have a full-on plan and maybe a death file laying around, but if you don't share it with anybody, then nobody's going to know how to uphold those for you. So having really concrete and clear needs and wants, and also speaking to those people and maybe even asking them permission to say, hey, I've been thinking about the end, and I have this plan, and I thought of you to help me, or I want you to be a part of it. And then this is the way I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be my healthcare agent. I want you to be my death care agent. And I want you to just make sure that these things happen so that I know that I was well cared for at the end of my life. So sharing your end of life wishes with your loved ones is essential and super important. And I always find that when you do have these conversations with your loved ones, um I don't know, there's a deeper bonding that happens, or at least in my experience. Either I sometimes help clients facilitate those conversations, or even just in my own, I always learn something about the person I'm speaking to that I didn't know before, because it's really an intimate, and maybe you don't we're not talking about this stuff all the time, so you're sharing things that are really deeply ingrained in your heart and in your spirit, and you can recognize and see each other on that level, and it's just a really beautiful and loving conversation. And then, yeah, this is just a slide of one of my offerings. Like Nicole attended, not this particular one, but this is my advanced care directive group. And you can see over here on the right, they are all holding their death files. So in my advanced directive groups, I do provide the documents of everything that goes in your death file, with a list in the front of things that are also not things that I provide, because most often maybe you would need an attorney, or certain life, everyone has different life circumstances, so not everything that goes in each individual's that comes to my groups is going to have the exact thing in their death files, but I set it up, and I give you everything that you need to be able to fill out your Colorado advanced directive, get your DNR ready to go, and to really think about, okay, what is the care, how do I want that to be upheld, and start that process. So I just wanted to share what that looks like. All right, so moving on to the essentials of end of life. So a lot of this is going to sound like repeat, but I really do think that it's the biggest advocacy that I can give you about what I'm talking about. So forgive the replay, but they matter so much. So thinking about the end is one of them. So familiarizing yourself with it and creating resources around your wishes and hopes for your end of life experience. So again, that forethought, that, okay, what do I need to do to face this? And I get it. I totally was one of those people who didn't like I mean, nobody really likes thinking about the end. Nobody really likes thinking about death, because it's hard and it's difficult. And I was definitely one of those people that kind of just put it on the back shelf and was like, oh, don't want to talk about that. That's scary. That makes me uncomfortable. But once I did decide to kind of bring it down and dust it off from that shelf, I was able to figure out that, okay, scary, yeah. But also there's a comfort in creating resources. There's a comfort in the facts, and there's a comfort in knowing solutions. So definitely familiarizing yourself with the fact, wherever you are, in your perspectives and the way that you hold your mortality, familiarizing yourself with that, and then creating resources around it. So, okay, what do I want? What are my wishes? How would I want this experience to go if I could plan it from A to Z? And then the next thing would be plan again to educate yourself on your options and what's available to you in your state and community, and then write it down on paper. That's also essential. And then one new thing I threw in here was comfort care measures. So I threw this in here because when you do fill out your advanced care directive, or you are thinking about how you want to be cared for in a medical way, should you be incapacitated or things looking really grim for your health because of whatever that circumstance is, sometimes it's really hard when you're not in that position to think about, well, how would I know? What would that be like? I feel like I don't want to be in that position. So I don't really know how to think about how, the only thing I would think about is get me out of that. But sometimes that's not the reality. And also that's not, and sometimes that's more of the harmful thing to do, is to continue to, I guess, go against nature is how I'll say it. But what I wanted to throw in here is that when you realize that when it comes to comfort care measures at end of life, it will look a lot like how you feel and how you lived. So what makes you comfortable now? What makes you feel calm? What makes you feel peaceful? Because these things will serve you the same purpose at end of life. So that was something really helpful for me when I kind of switched it to, well, all the things, I don't know, it was very daunting. And especially, I'm not a doctor. So I was like, I don't really know. But when I flipped it to like, well, I know that X, Y, and Z, I know X, Y, and Z I don't want, but also these things would make me feel calm. These would make me feel comfortable. This brings peace to my life that I do or try to do every day. Those are the things that you want to think about. Like, how can I bring comfort? How can I bring peace? How can I bring calm to my environment? And it reflects how you lived. So that, again, that thread of life and death, where you're still going to incorporate the things that served you in life. And that's very essential at end of life. And then again, sharing with your loved ones. So the most important piece, again, share your wishes, and then share them with your support network. So obviously your loved ones, your family, your friends, your healthcare advocates, if you have one, but also your medical team. I know that, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but when I had my physical for this year, my doctor asked if I had an advanced care directive, and if not, would I be willing to fill one out? And I was like, I do. And I felt so proud of myself. And they were actually kind of surprised. They were like, oh my gosh, you're like one in a million of people that actually have it already done. And I was like, I'd be happy to send you a copy. And so I sent them a copy. I sent them like all these and some extra things that I have just to make sure that I'm all good. So yeah, sharing that stuff with your primary care doctor is really important. You never know, all of these things link in some way. And if you can think about your end of life plans or your end of life wishes or your end of life care, thinking about is like, how can I make this network system where all the parts are working in coordinates with one another? So like you get this paperwork, you get it done, share it with your funeral director. If you found one, share what's really important to you, like not just what are the prices, what do you do, but share with your funeral director what's important to you, like and can they provide a service that reflects you? And I think that sometimes is not the way that we approach funeral homes or funeral directors, just because we're so used to just kind of death being taken out of our view, and death sort of like, we just trust the entities that do this sort of work. And maybe there's some uncomfortability with that, and that's okay. But yeah, speaking to your funeral directors in a way that's like, hey, this is who I am, and this is what's really important to me. Are you in alignment with that? Do your services reflect that? Is also sharing those wishes and those wants. So with that whole network, so your loved ones, your family, your medical team, your funeral director. I'm trying to think if there's anyone. I mean, if you have an estate attorney, and all the moving parts of how you can build a really strong, solid end of life care team. And then I have to, because I'm a death doula, but also essential at end of life is to hire a death doula. So much of, I can't tell you that, I mean, I can tell you that we are trained as professionals to know the options and the resources on a medical side, and also on a body disposition side, and also have really great deep relationships with all of these entities. So we have relationships with hospices, we have relationships with palliative care teams. So palliative care team is very much about comfort care at end of life, and it doesn't have to be from a 6-month end of life diagnosis or not. Hospice is a 6-month or less prognosis to be a part of that. But we have these relationships with these entities that will serve you and provide you what you need at end of life, if that's in alignment with you, and also your body disposition. So when you hire a death doula, basically like all this stuff I'm talking about, like educate, research, have like, do all the, like the invitation of you doing it all yourself, like all of that probably X's out by like 85%. And the 85 goes to the death doula to provide you the resources, to provide you options, and then take those from what you decide and make it happen. So we're kind of like that front person through all of the networks that you need to support you during this time and your family, to make sure that all of it's working in accordance to what you planned. And that's genuinely our job. And that's genuinely our advocacy, is just to make sure that if you have done the due diligence of having the end in mind and you've done the planning, that it's our job to make sure it works, to make sure you have all the necessities. So I could rant about why death doulas are so important, but we are an end of life essential. And it goes without saying. And I say that, yes, because I'm a death doula, but also because if I had a death doula with me in any of the losses that I've experienced, I'm sure that I would have walked away feeling held, and I would have a lot less regrets, just because I didn't know what I was doing and I could have used somebody that did. All right. So this last little bit is resources for you. I hope that I can maybe get these over. I'm not sure. I guess it's right here so you can see it, but they're websites that are really essential. So this first one is Compassion and Choices. So this is a website all about end of life. It has everything from like articles on like, I don't know, anything you can think about, like maybe body disposition options, what's legal in the States, what's up and coming, why would I hire a death doula? uh, can I find an estate attorney in my town or in my state? What do they do? Like definitions of things. And basically also too, it's a resource, but it also has like just within it, just like all the paperwork and all the things that you might need if you're doing end of life planning on your own. And then this next one is the Conversation Project. I love them so much. They are basically a resource of helping you families, helping individuals have these conversations about end of life. And they do it in a really fun way. They do it in, obviously we're talking about death. We're talking about, in all these different scenarios, but they give you prompts, they give you suggestions, they kind of set up a scenario of a really good end of life conversation. So definitely worth checking out. And then advanced directives by state. This website is called everplans.com. Again, a wonderful resource with lots of wonderful, good information for end of life planning. But also that's where you can go to print out your advanced directives for your state for free. So it has all the states in the United States. You can print it out, you can do it yourself, and get it done. So that's a wonderful resource. And then I threw in this woman by the name of Barbara Carnes, and she's an award-winning author. She's a hospice nurse, but she also has some videos and some books, and her books are wonderful. They're like these little tiny, like little zines, so they're not like really big. They're very easy to read, but they basically explain like, oh, you just got diagnosed with a terminal illness. Here are some to-dos to do. Here's some things to think about. Here's ways to support yourself. Is there ways to talk to your family? Or your loved one just got, it goes vice versa. And also explains the dying process in like a really concrete and understandable way. So I know that that's something that a lot of loved ones worry about during the time of death, is like, why is this happening? Why is that happening? If you don't have a death doula with you to kind of have that extra eye and lead how that process is going, it can be kind of scary. So there's this really great zine of like the dying process and the symptoms. And then also when we're getting closer to death, she has one on grief. Anyway, she's a wonderful resource on knowing what dying is, not just in a hospice care in a setting, but also just in general. And then also has a wonderful like caregiver workbook. She's wonderful, so I had to put her in there. And then the last one is the Funeral Commerce Alliance. So this is an organization that gives you all of your rights to your death care upon your death. So it gives you laws in your state about what you can and can't do. Like for instance, if you wanted to have a home funeral, it gives you all the laws and the regulations as to what would be a law that you would have to abide by and what's not. And that's really good to know, especially if you do want a home viewing or you want a viewing in general in a space that maybe isn't a funeral home. So that's a really wonderful resource as well. And that is what I have for this evening. And I put, obviously, thank you. I, again, really appreciate being able to come and share this piece of my work with you. It's broad and I could go on for hours on each thing that I brought up, but yeah, I'm really passionate about this work. It's important. And if I can help support or bring resources, like also I'm a resource, I guess I should have put myself on there as well, as I'm a resource to decision making and navigating these waters of end of life on many different levels. So please know that I'm a resource in your community if you're in Colorado, or not. I do virtual stuff as well. And my email is there and my website as well, if you ever want to get in contact.
Thank you so much, Carla. That was awesome. I did put your contact information in the chat, so that's available. If you could send me those resources, I can drop them in too. Thank you for sending those and putting those out there. I think that that's one of the biggest challenges with this is, you know, the Google and the web is there's so much information out there and misinformation, and just, you know, trying to figure out where to start is super helpful, and reputable websites to get good solid information. So that's awesome. I think one of my big takeaways is, of course, sharing your wishes with loved ones, and making sure that you're letting people know where you're maybe putting your death file or talking to your loved ones about what you're thinking about. I know that when I went through the advance directive, it really brought up a lot of things to me that I didn't even know were options. I think some of the body decomposition like options were just so interesting. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that a little bit more and do some research and just see what's available out there. I know that you had mentioned here in the state of Colorado, we actually have a lot of options compared to maybe some other states. And so that's just kind of an interesting topic to discuss and look into. And then I think the one quote that really stuck with me was, living with the end in mind will actually help you live with more purpose and intention. So I think that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for everybody who is joining us tonight and is going to be watching the recording. Carla and I are both available if you have other questions, and this will be available for you to go back and also listen to again or share with others. So thank you again. Hope everybody has a great night. And thanks again, Carla.
Bye.
Bye.